There we go. And we are now recording. So welcome everyone to the final in our series of Wilder Gardens talks that we've been holding during the month of March. It's been great to have so many of you join us over the last few months, last few weeks, even months, it feels like months, last few weeks of these talks. And we're joined today, we're very lucky to be joined today by Mike Ramsey, who's been talking to us about Swifts and why they need our help and what he and others locally have been doing to help them as well. So I'm going to hand off to Mike now, if that's okay. Mike.
Good evening, everyone. I'm just going to share my screen with you so you can see what I'm going to be talking about. So can everyone see that? Right. So, thank you, George, for that introduction, and thank you, Greenhavens, for inviting me to give this talk. So, I'm going to be talking about swifts. You can see from these images here, and we've been helping them in Lewes for a few years, and the idea is I can tell you what we've managed to do in Lewes, and that might give you some ideas of things you might be able to do in your local area. So the overview of the talk, what I'm going to be talking about, basically I'll talk about what are swifts and why are they so fascinating, and then what is LSS, that's Lewes Swift Supporters. Why and when were we formed, what our objectives are and what we've managed to do, and our plans for this coming year. And then I'll turn to what you might be able to do for your local swifts. I've got a little bit of information about sightings that have been made locally to you. And then draw some conclusions, give you the contact details for us and the county-wide body that deals in swifts, Sussex Ornithological Society. And then we'll have the Q&A, questions and answers after that. And I'm very, very happy to answer the questions. And I think that's one of the main parts of this. So I'm going to try and move on to my next slide. So why are swifts so appealing? Well, they're an iconic species in Sussex. They're even pretty much on our coat of arms there. These are technically called martlets on the shield, Sussex shield, but there's a strong probability that they were derived from swifts. They've got a lack of claws in the way that swifts have only got very limited claws on their feet. So an emblem of Sussex, and they're also very quintessential in Lewes. Even on our town maps, we have little pictures of swifts flying about. And it's the quintessential sound of a summer evening. If you're walking around, well, lots of towns, particularly in Europe, but it's also in Lewes, and I believe there are some coming through in your areas as well. That's the sound of swifts calling. They travel in groups. I've got a little bit of video here that was taken last year in Lewes. It's a bit quick. Woo! Did you see them? This was someone up in the top of Lewes. You can see going out there towards the cliff. I'll play that one more time. You might be able to just see the swift screaming by. There they go. They go very fast and they scream. So they really bring the summer to life. And when you see films that have summertime in England, they often put Swift soundtrack on just to make you believe it's summer. Now can I? Yes. So they're the last migrant bird to arrive, pretty much. They arrive in early May. We often get them, the first sightings in late April, but they come in their bigger numbers in early May. But they're already gone again in late July, so it's really high summer we get them. They go much sooner than say the swallows. Yes. So they're amazing. Once they go out of the nest, once they fledge, they spend all their life on the wing. They feed on the wing, catching insects. They sleep on the wing. They go really high up and shut down half their brain and sleep, and then shut the other half down. And they even mate on the wing. And they only come back to land when they're going to nest. So for the first couple of years, the young swifts don't even land at all. So amazing bird. If you see a bird sitting on a wire, that's definitely not a swift. That's more likely to be a swallow. In a minute, I'm going to show you the differences. They choose to nest with us in our buildings rather than in nature. They originally used to nest on in cliffs and in trees. There are a few in trees in the Caledonian pine forests in Scotland, but most of the time they choose to nest in our buildings. And in Lewes, where we've got about 10% of the swift population in the county, we've got these nooks and crannies. There's a building here in Lewes where you see a lot of nests under here, and there's some under here, and there's a church I'll show you a bit more of. So they like the nooks and crannies. That's where they like to nest. I'll talk more about that later. So swifts, how can you tell them from the two common birds that people confuse them with, swallows and house martins? And here's just a quick view. The swifts basically are nearly all black, pretty much black. They've got these black scimitar wings. They roar about, got a shortish forked tail, no real white on them, a tiny bit under their chin, but nothing to speak of, basically all black. Now, compare that with a swallow. Swallow has got white underneath it, as well as this beautiful red, particularly in the males, and this long streaming tail. So if you see any white, it's very unlikely to be a swift. And the other bird that can be confused with is the house martin. And the house martins have got white on their chest, but also on the back here, white here. And they're much smaller, chunkier birds, the house martin. So if you see white on the back, it's a house martin. But if it's all black, scimitar wings, it's likely to be a swift. So what about Lewes Swift supporters? Well, we originally started in 2015, and we had support from the county-wide body here, Sussex Ornithological Society. And you can see their logo there. And Sussex Wildlife Trust were also very supportive. And SOS, as I will call it from here, Swift Ornithological Society, has a swift champion who looks after swifts across the whole county. And he's David Campbell, and I think he's in the audience this evening, and he can maybe say a few words at the end if he cares to. So we were triggered in Lewes by a very charismatic speaker, a chap called Edward Meir, came to the town hall and talked to the local people in the days when we could really meet face to face. And he's the founder of an organization called Swift Conservation, which there's their website, and they look after swifts nationally. And he's a very enthusiastic character, and he really inspired us to start looking after our swifts and try to help them recover their numbers. And he's actually coming back to give a talk this 20th of April. And if you'd like to come and hear him talk about swifts, there's a link on the LSS website. I'll give you the details at the end. Sometimes it seems to be, there we are. Anyway, there was a slight hiatus in LSS, but we reformed in May 2019, and we've currently got 5 committee members, and we've got over 100 supporters from around Lewes. We've got plenty of Facebook followers, and the Facebook followers and supporters often cite swifts and send us sightings, and they put up nest boxes. I'll tell you more about what they do later on in the talk. So what are our aims and objectives? Well, basically, we are trying to increase the number of swifts nesting in Lewes and the surrounding areas through providing and encouraging more swift nesting, because that is the main limiting factor. Running out of places to nest because we keep filling in all the holes when we're doing up our houses. That's one of the main reasons. To increase people's awareness and knowledge of swifts through education and engagement, and in a way, that's what we're doing tonight. That people aren't really often aware of swifts, or they're subconsciously aware, but they don't really realize how well, interesting they are, but also that they're part of our culture, and they're in trouble, so we need to help them. And we're also trying to provide opportunities for local people to get involved, appreciate and be educated about local swifts. If they've got them nesting, how can they help them? How can they help increase the size of the colony if they want to? So the first thing we had to do was to find out how many nests there were in Lewes and where they were. And this was to establish a baseline so we could judge if we were making any improvements. So we initiated a systematic survey of Lewes in 2019. And there's a nice picture there of a swift going under the eaves of a roof, which is where one of the places they really like to nest. So the 2019 survey, we divided the centre of Lewes into 4 rectangles, and we surveyed each area twice a month, just May, June and July. So just 6 visits minimum. We adapted this design from one that had been developed in Brighton with the help of RSPB. And we, as well as those, that information, we got information from outside these areas in Lewes generally, via the public, via Facebook and Twitter. There we are twice a month in each square, and we try to note their activity. Were they flying low, which is a good sign for maybe wanting to breed or already breeding. In the screeching parties you saw on that video, screeching, and sometimes they are what's called banging. They go and they try and get into houses under the eaves. We logged the nests that were in use, and we recorded on standard forms and collated it all into big Excel spreadsheets. And then we submitted all these results onto an international database called BirdTrack, and it's run by an organisation called the British Trust for Ornithology, but it's also supported by RSPB, Birdwatch, and it's BirdLife International. So it's an international database, and it means that people across the country can see how things are going for swifts across the country and across the whole of Europe, because they're in trouble across the whole of Europe too. Right, now, so the results of the 2019 survey, it was our first attempt. We found 33 nests at 15 sites, and the 15 sites are noted in with the red markers, and you can see some were in the areas we set off, but we found new ones outside, and we found other areas where swifts were showing interests, and we noted where all the swift boxes were, and we helped some people to put a few up. But it was a good start, I think. But we decided that in 2020, we wanted to increase the survey area. So we put 2 new areas, an area called Wallens, just north, and then we went into Morling, and we did a survey up there to see what we might be able to find. And we got many more sightings. We got Facebook and Twitter really running, and we set up another thing called Swift Watch, I'll talk a little bit about later, where people were encouraged to just give us information on what they'd seen, where they'd seen it, when, and what the swifts were doing. And I say we nearly got 2,000 lots of information in. So we were able there, the results in 2020 was a more thorough survey in a way, and And this time we managed to detect 64 active nests at 23 locations. So we can't really compare these 2019 and 2020 figures. It doesn't mean there are almost twice as many swifts. It means that we were just getting better at detecting them, I think, and counting them. And the survey area was bigger, obviously, so they're not really comparable. But we found a new colony in this Malling area, and that came in from a Facebook post. Someone just said they'd seen them flying into houses, and we found a colony with 8 nests in Malling, which was a real nice surprise. And we also helped install 28 swift boxes around Lewes to help when the young swifts fledge. The next year they come back, and the year after, and they're looking for somewhere new to nest. And that's when we hope to attract them to swift boxes. So some other results that we got in the 2020 survey, we couldn't compare the total, but we can compare the size of the colonies where the swifts tend to gather. And our prime site is this one called St. Anne's Church. And here are 2 bits of the church, the east and the west. And you can see everywhere there's a red mark. That's where we found a swift nest. We found swifts going in and out. And we found 19 nests last year, which is really remarkable. And we thought that was good. But if we look back, in 2020, there was one man who did a survey on his own and wrote it up, which was very good. And he only did 6 colonies in Lewes, and he noted down those values here. You can see he found 54 nests back in the year 2000. And all last year, we found all these nests here. So some of the colonies had disappeared, but some, St. Anne's Church disappeared for a while. What they did was they replaced the roof, or mended the roof, and inadvertently filled in all these holes. And then the swifts started to work their way back in, and they're breaking the areas down. So they can get back in. And last year we found 8 nests. This year we found 19 at St. Anne's. But all in all, there's been a 52% decline on these key sites since the year 2000. So you can see this is a problem, and it's actually rather similar to the 57% decline that's been reported nationally between 1995 and 2017. And that was reported by the British Trust for Ornithology. So Lewes has gone down, but it's in line with what's happening in the country as a whole. So what did we identify? We found that obviously the numbers had fallen at some of the key sites like St. Anne's Church, and that most of the swifts are nesting in colonies because they're a very gregarious bird, and that action was required to try and increase these numbers and prevent decline, try and avoid ill-considered renovations of properties, help people. Mainly, it's not malicious, people just don't realize that swifts are there, or they don't know what to do about it. But these hot spots in Lewes, where there are big colonies, are the most likely place to attract new nests. So we got money, we put in an application to SOS for funding, and they funded 10 new nest boxes. And you can see a map of what's called Western Road in Lewes, up at the top of Lewes. And we put 10 new boxes in, and here are 2 of the boxes gone in, some of our members and some local councillors who were very supportive of this. And what we're hoping this year is the young swifts are going to see these new nest boxes and expand the colony. That's what we're hoping. So our future plans for LSS are to increase the number of swift nests near the existing colonies. So in this year, we've put 6 more nests up in a road called De Montfort, which is parallel to Western Road. And we got funding from another couple of organisations, Friends of Lewes and the Chalkcliffe Trust. So, and with each box, we, in these key areas, we suggest that people have swift callers. They play that call I played to you early on in the talk, and that just for a couple of hours a day in the breeding season, and that helps to attract the new nests. It helps the young swifts to know where potential nesting site is. So we're also planning to improve our swift survey by increasing the survey area even further into other areas of Lewes, because we found nests where we didn't realize there might be others. And we've had new volunteers coming. We had a local meeting and virtually, and new people volunteered to help survey, which is very important. And we've encouraged more people to report casual sightings just when they see them flying up and down, and then report via social media to give us ideas of where else they're active. So we're also taking another line, and we're working with the local town council and district council and the South Downs National Park to help putting swift accommodation into the processing of suitable planning applications. So we've prepared a leaflet in collaboration with the town council on how they can help to provide swift accommodation. And where to make it a requirement of planning permission. And there's one little case study here in a place called Spittal Road, where there's new housing going in. This is Lewes, and this is the red area where we think there's a reasonable chance of getting swift occupation. And the first question the planners ask is the planning application in this particular area? And they also then ask, has the development got a place that's at least 4.5 meters above the ground where the swifts can get up into? So in this new development in Spittal Road, this is a proposed development, hasn't been built. We suggested that they could put in swift bricks into this development because this is right next to an active colony. And swift bricks look like this. They just look like normal bricks. They get matched to the other bricks, but they go in and they leave a little hole where the swifts can get in and make their nests. So this is a little plan view of the development. And the next question, is it north facing? That's particularly good. And these are, the swifts have particular orientations they like. And is it unobstructed? And for most of these places, the swifts can get in and out without obstruction. Here, there are some trees, but they're quite low down. We can put the swift bricks high up above the trees. So the developers have been asked to make these adaptations. And if you're thinking about maybe having a swift box or a swift brick, here are some of the swift bricks in these buildings. There's a swift going into a swift brick, but here's a swift box with a swift poking out. There's a lovely leaflet provided by Swift Conservation that I mentioned earlier that Edward Mayer organizes, and it shows you here the orientations that the swifts like. If it's a box, they're not so fond of the south orientation because the box is in the direct sunlight, so the chicks might get too hot. So they tend to go on the north face or the east face, less the west face where the prevailing winds come. But we have got a few cases where they're in that direction. So if you want more details about that, there's a nice leaflet on the Swift Conservation website. And we're also trying to encourage more participation. We've been recruiting custodians. These are people, the name we've given to people who have houses where the nests are. So the lady who's in this house here with her 8 nests, we're helping her to protect it from future development so the swifts can get in, not putting up scaffolding, for example, between May and the beginning of August, and helping custodians. Say that one had a swift fall down their chimney, and this is the swift that a lady had down her chimney last year, and it was a young fledgling and it couldn't fly, so we helped her to get it to a rescue service where they could feed it and eventually did release it. So we do guided walks to show people where the nests are, And we have a newsletter. We had 3 last year. Goes up. They're onto our website, so you can read them. And we've written an annual report with all our raw data and the findings. We've just launched our website. I'll show you later. And we've got a local lottery. When people buy tickets through that, they can become more aware of Lewes Swifts, and half their ticket value is donated to the Swifts. So that helps us buy more Swift boxes, for example, and help people to get Swifts. So this is one page from our website, and this is the page. Here's the website, and here are the different categories. And we've got this thing, Swift Watch, which is where we are encouraging people to go out, especially in lockdown. They could see the Swifts going by and tell us about them. And we just wanted the date and time, where they were, and the number they'd seen, and a bit about the weather. And that's what helped us find new colonies. But Swifts don't exist in isolation. They're part of the big ecosystem. And we've been working with other organizations, including this Wildflower Lewes, who look after increasing the wildflowers in Lewes. And I see this is part of the Greener Gardens talk series. And this, in a way, is part of the wider message that here we have Swifts, but they rely on catching insects. And here's a blue butterfly that is particularly fond of kidney vetch. So if you haven't got kidney vetch, this butterfly can't breed. So we need to look after wildflowers, and that will help us produce more butterflies, and lots of other insects. And then the swifts can be eaten by peregrines, and they can be, when they die, they can be eaten and go back into the food chain and back towards feeding the vetch. This is a lovely web diagram that was produced by a lady called Leslie Healy in Wildflower Lewes to show how we need to look after the whole ecosystem, not just swifts, but if we look after the ecosystem, a lot of these species will flourish. But for the local insects, we need local plants, and Wildflower Lewes have been espousing planting the local flowers instead of flowers from a garden centre, some of which, even though they're supposed to be bee friendly, have got pesticides on them, surprisingly enough. So it's much better to try and plant local flowers, like there's the kidney vetch, but horseshoe vetches, self-heal, marjoram, daisies, oxeye daisies. All these will help sponsor local wildlife and keep their habitat healthy in all sorts of ways. So now turning to the Greenhavens area. The good news is there have already been reported sightings of swifts in Seaford, Newhaven, Peacehaven, and Telscombe Cliffs. And we can set this in the broader context of the swifts in the whole of Sussex. And I got a lot of this data from David Campbell, the SOS Swift champion, who's with us this evening. This is an atlas produced by SOS of where the swifts are and where they breed across the whole of Sussex. This was in 2008 to 2011, and where the big blobs are, there's confirmed breeding, and then probable breeding, possible breeding, and the white ones, the white holes, dots, are where they're present, but there's no evidence yet of breeding. So if we zoom in on Peacehaven, Newhaven, and Seaford, you can see back in those in that period, in that atlas, they actually had confirmed breeding and probable breeding in Newhaven, and activity from swifts in Peacehaven. The fact that there isn't a dot for breeding means maybe just people didn't see, and that's what we need more surveys for, to find out what's actually going on. But getting slightly more recent, this is sighting data for 2010 to 2020, so up to last year. And this is provided by the bird track database that we feed into at LSS. And this was extracted for me by David Campbell. And you can see here, I've picked out some of the local areas. And these are the total numbers of sightings, 2,000 sightings over the 11 year period. And you can see they're spread across the area, which is good news. I've put Saltbean in just for good measure. And these are the percentages of the whole. So you can see sort of 20%-ish, 27% around Seaford, 20%-ish in Newhaven, and the Telscombe Cliffs here and Saltbean. The average sighting per year are here. So you just get a flavour of, this is just the sightings that have been reported. I'm sure that there'll have been far more swifts around than ever got reported. So there's a good sign that they're already in your area. And within this database, there were nests reported in Newhaven in 2015 at a place near Rookery Close, Denton. I saw some people there might know where that is. I've never been there. I only found this the other day. And Seaford, East Blatchington, Royal Drive, near there, nests were reported in 2011 and 2012. So there's good news. So how could you help your local swifts? Well, you could just go out and report sightings, and you could log them on this bird track software, and there's the address for that. RSPB also have a Swift mapper, which I think you can have a phone app for that. And that I think feeds into this same database. The other thing you might want to do is set up your own local Swift group to combine your surveying and coordinate it across one town, several towns. Another thing you could do would be to put up a Swift box or a Swift brick, or two. We have some people who put up several. And there are good advice leaflets for this available from this Swift Conservation website. And that's the Swift box leaflet. Some of them you can make the boxes yourself, or you can buy them. Or Swift bricks. There's several different manufacturers, and you can get them to match the brick. But this is mainly when you're building a new development or a new extension where it's not too intrusive to put a brick in. And the other thing you could do would be to lobby your local councils to require Swift accommodation in new developments. Someone emailed me some months back about a new development near Seaford and wanted advice. Could they know whether Swift bricks were feasible? And that's a good thing to do. And then you need to lobby councillors to, and it gives you net biodiversity gain, which the developers need to show when in for planning applications. So the conclusions. Good news, swifts are known to be active in your area, with some of them breeding. But more surveys may reveal more swifts, more breeding. We found new colonies in Lewes that we didn't know were there. You don't know what might be going on really in your area. But I think this is best done by communal effort. You can compare notes, support each other. So this area could organise its own Swift supporters group. And for comparison, Lewes Swift supporters, as I said, we've established a baseline, 64 pairs, nesting pairs. We've confirmed a local decline in Swift numbers that about matches the national trend, but we're hoping to try and halt and reverse this decline by the actions I've been talking about. And we've started implementation with the supports of local volunteers and local councils. And you could similarly work together to help your local Swifts, maybe under the umbrella of SOS, because they look after the whole county in a broad way. And obviously you could have advice from Lewes if and when you wanted it. So the contact details. Here are the Lewes Swift supporters email, Twitter, Facebook, and the new website that we launched a week or two back. And this is another plug for this Edward Mayer talk. If you've enjoyed this, if you want to hear a real expert, Edward has been doing this across, he goes internationally and finds out about swifts, where they go in Africa, where they are in Europe. And he's talking in the broad enhancing urban diversity concepts. And you find a link on the website. SOS, David Campbell I've talked about. You can email him on swifts@sos.org.uk, and that's the SOS website for Swifts. So thank you for your attention. I hope you found it interesting. And it's now time for questions and discussions of these issues. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike. Much appreciated. That was absolutely fascinating. Before we go to questions, is it okay if I do the whole thing that I usually forget to do and pop up a quick poll on everyone's screen, just so we can hear about how you heard about the talk, if that's all right, before anyone disappears? Just as it's a condition of our grant application funding that we got for these talks. So if you don't mind, I'll just pop that on your screen now. Did you say, was it David wanted to say something? Did you say, or?
Well, if he, we can ask him if he wants to.
If David's welcome to.
Just a quick hello. Great talk, Mike. If you can see me and hear me.
Yeah.
So if anybody wants to get in touch with anything to do with Sussex Swifts, as you pointed out, swifts@sos.org.uk. If you want to set up a Swift group, if you want to know anything about boxes or bricks, or just anything at all, just feel free to drop me a line. So there you go.
Thank you,
David. Right, so if we get onto the Q&A now, if that's okay with everyone, and those watching on Facebook Live, if you've got any questions at all, do feel free to pop them in the comments box, and we'll run through those as well as the ones in the Zoom chat. Anne Rowe has asked, I thought I heard some today but couldn't see them. Probably too early?
Yes, very, very likely to have been too early. There has been one tentative sighting quite a long way away, so I wouldn't expect to see the first ones around here until at least mid-April. But it's not totally impossible, but it's just highly unlikely.
Brilliant. Thank you, Mike. From Bluebell, great name. Hi, enjoying your talk immensely. Do you have plans we can use to make Swift nest boxes, or can you suggest where to get them from? Also, best sites to put them, please. I think you answered the sites one, but if you've got any further suggestions on where you can get them from, that would be brilliant.
On the Swift Conservation website, if you just Google swiftconservation.org, they've got plans, little do-it-yourself ones, and it tells you how thick the plywood needs to be and the designs, a template. So that's the best way. We in Lewes, we've got one particular design of boxes which we find the birds like, but I'm not sure that they would like the same one in Seaford. But depends a little bit on the location. But we could discuss details like that in an email. I wouldn't want to give a blanket recommendation.
Brilliant, thank you. We've got Alice saying in the Facebook chat, oh, lovely. I wasn't able to join, but interested to know tips on bird boxes to support swift nesting. So I don't know if you'd probably suggest the same. The talk has been recorded, so you can watch it back if you'd like to get full details. I don't know if you want to say anything on that, Mike. Tips on bird boxes.
Obviously, it is a special box, the Swift box, and some of the ones that they seem to like in Lewes have an up and under entry, so the Swifts can come up, because lots of them are fledged from under the eaves of buildings, so they seem to like going up. But in other places they seem to go into horizontal entry boxes. So on the website, that Swift Conservation, there are a few ones named there, so including ones that sell at almost cost. So that'd be my take on that.
Fantastic, thank you, Mike. We would love, oh, this is what Karen said. Mike said, we would love you to write this up for our blogs on the website and share it with wider Greenhavens members. Would you be happy to write for us?
I think a lot of what I've said is in our newsletters and things. So I could put some links through to the newsletters where we talk about some of these issues. I think that might be helpful. And as you say, if the talk is here on YouTube, people can look at it again. I think that would be the best option.
Brilliant. Yeah, that's the joy of recording these, is they're always there for reference, which is brilliant. Nancy's asked, might have missed this at the start, why are swifts in decline and what are their threats?
Okay, the one I've obviously talked about a lot is loss of nesting sites. When people take down their old soffits and put up PVC soffits and then seal it in with silicone, there's no little chinks where the swifts can get in to nest. They like going up to the top of walls, for example, and nest just on a bare wall. So I've told you about what we can do about that. But the other thing that I haven't talked so much about, I mentioned, was insect decline. And part of the problem is quite a few of you might be aware of this sort of 50% decline in insect biomass that was reported in a study in Germany a few years back. And it's thought to be quite a general, and certainly we all know this story of when you're driving your car. In the old days, you used to get plastered with insects in the summer, and now it hardly gets plastered at all. So insect biomass is down, and that means when the swifts are flying, they can't catch as many insects. So it's harder for them to feed their young. So the idea of talking about wildflowers and increasing the number of insects is part of the picture. So those are the two big issues. But the one we can do the most easy thing about is providing the accommodation.
Brilliant. I think it seems to be a common thing now that we've sort of seen throughout most of these talks now, is habitat destruction is quite a hefty reason for a lot of declines of a lot of species. So I think given how easy, especially with swifts, let's be honest, compared to a lot of saving nature, how easy it is to put up a bird box, a swift box, or a bee hotel, it's great.
And they've actually chosen to live with us. You'd have thought
Yes.
it should be easier, but now we've even made it hard to live with us. Never mind.
We've quote unquote lived against them and as a species and decimated what they have, and now they're choosing to live with us. It's a bit strange, really. It's great though, and I personally urge everyone to, before I get on my soapbox again, to do what they can, and I think that's the moral of all these talks. So Julia's asked, do they prefer to nest away from the coast, as I've not seen any in New Haven?
No, if you look at the swift map for Brighton, for example, they've got big swathes, a big colony in Hove right next to the sea. So, and as I said, they have nested in cliffs in earlier times. So there's definitely nothing wrong with being on the coast for a swift.
Brilliant. I know that sighting that you noted down in Denton, for example, it's quite a sheltered area down there. I think I can guess exactly where it was. And that's great. It
might be interesting for someone to go and have a look and see if it's still there this summer. I have a grid reference if anyone needs it.
I might have to do that. It's about a 2-minute walk down the road. So Vicky's asked, do swifts nest in the same types of areas or buildings as swallows? And if so, would swallows bully swifts and beat them to nest sites?
It's a good question. They aren't in competition at all, really. Swifts, swallows just tend to go into open barns, and they go into the barn and build a nest inside, and then you need the access to the barn area. And house martins build their own nests up under the eaves of mud. So they're not in competition at all. And incidentally, swallows are much cleaner than sort of house martins. We have problems finding the nest because they don't leave a trail of poo for us to find, which is very annoying for us, but very good for the residents in the houses. But they do have competition from sparrows. So we regularly have last year we had a Facebook tussle where the swifts arrived into their usual nest, but there were sparrows nesting there already because they start earlier. So there was about a 24-hour tussle reported on Facebook, and it was obviously the swifts won. They very nearly always do, but it took them a while to persuade the sparrows to vacate. But of course, sparrows are in trouble as well. So we need sparrow nests as well.
It's a balance, isn't it? As
Yeah.
with everything. How did you train volunteers to confidently identify swifts when surveying? Asked Karen.
Okay, we've got these 5 new surveyors this year, and we are taking them out on a walk with us. Well, actually, this year, because of restrictions currently, they're going to go with just one of our members, and just walk around and make sure they know what they've got to do, that they're recognizing the right bird, and the things to look for. And then with them, we're going to do one walk when they do their first survey, offer to walk with them the first time. So we're sort of spreading the knowledge between the surveyors. And one of the surveyors was only started last year, and she's already very good. And she's the lady that found the swift down her chimney, fell into her kitchen. So she had a sort of baptism of fire, as it were. She didn't know she had swifts at all.
That's brilliant. Wow.
Yeah.
Chance of that. Vicky's asked, are they one of the victims on the continent and here to glue traps, etc., that seem to be causing songbirds problems in olive groves and food producers' land?
I haven't come across the problem of glue traps, but they do have problems on their migration routes and freak weather events. I'm sure if you listen to the Edward Mayer talk, he'd probably talk about stories and the way they try and avoid storms, and they're putting tracking devices on them now and finding out how they're doing it. But that's a whole second talk. But I haven't heard about the glue traps and that they have problems with it.
Cool. Thank you. Karen has asked, the difficulty I have with all the advice I give is the folk physically struggle to put the boxes in. Do you have risk assessments and liability insurance, etc., when you use the big ladders, etc.?
That's a good point. When we initially started, we did have some issues. But we've now got a professional builder who will put up swift boxes, and he put up the 10 for us for the SOS money we had. And obviously he charges, and we put that price in. And when we apply for the money, we put in for the box and the fitting and the caller. So you've got to think about it in advance. Obviously, there are a few people who are agile enough to do it, but a lot of people will need some help. Yes, so there are professional builders who will do that, if you can find them. Obviously, it's not a big job. This guy is a bit of a Swift enthusiast himself. So
brilliant.
How much would that cost to put one box up?
Well, for one style of box, it's 20 quid for the box, 30 quid for some designs, and then if there's a number of boxes going in, sort of 20 quid a box, say. But it depends on who's putting them up and which style of box and things like that. But that's the sort of order.
Yeah.
Brilliant. It's really good to know, though, that builders will happily do that, and
Some.
that they're some. Well, hopefully more can do it, because there's absolutely no reason why not. In my mind, it's a very, I think, very sustainable thing to do, to say the least, for them. So brilliant. Is lack of insect food part of the problem? We're too clean and tidy today, says Chrissy.
Well, the lack of insect food I talked about a few questions ago, and that is an issue. And they fly. Sometimes they fly over the river. Where I'm sitting, I can see over the river, and you can sometimes see them going up and down. And sometimes they fly quite big distances to get high populations, high density of insects to feed their young. And that depends on the weather. So there's all sorts of interesting things that if there's bad weather and they can't feed the young stop developing and sort of hold. And then when the weather gets better, they can restart their development. They've got some interesting adaptations. But overall, insect availability is one of the factors, but I think it's not the biggest one, and it's one that's harder to do something about. We can obviously lobby the government to try and restrict the use of pesticides and things to try and help the insects come back. That's the longer term. The accommodation is a quicker thing we can do.
Brilliant. Thank you, Mike. Are there any problems at their migration sites? Chrissy also asks.
Well, there's the route for migration. Our swifts go down sort of west of the Sahara, end up in sub-Saharan Africa, overwinter there, and some of them go through to places like Mozambique. And there have been reports of some issues there, but I think, well, as far as we haven't got enough information to know for sure, but we've certainly got enough problems up here that we can identify for that not to be the big issue. And we've got these freak weather events that sometimes delay them. So the climate change is having a bit of an effect on their migration as well.
Yeah, really interesting that, and how sort of global warming, climate change is going to affect that. And of course, all migratory birds as well are starting to suffer a little bit from that as well, aren't they? Which is definitely a shame. So the more we can do, yet again, the better. How far do they travel to feed? Asks Karen.
It varies, but there was one interesting study I was looking at in Northern Ireland, and from all over Northern Ireland, they all seem to congregate on Loch Ness, so they travel all over because there's a lot of insects there. So some of them are traveling tens of kilometers to get good feeding, especially when they're feeding young. Obviously, if it's local, that makes it so much easier. But the further they have to go, the more energy they use, the less food the chicks can get. And some of these chicks we find for rescue, there's one theory is part of it is they haven't been getting enough food in some years. So that might account for some of the problems.
Cool, interesting. Alex and Shelley ask, what are the differences between swifts and swallows? Well,
in that slide I showed early on, and people can go back to look at that slide if they want. The key idea is if you see any white on the underside, you've got either a swallow or a martin. You haven't got a swift, because swifts have got hardly any white on them at all. They're black scimitar wings. The swallows have got white and red under their chin, and the long needle-like tail, and that's the swallow. And the swifts, it's a much shorter V, black V. So I think it's the colour that gives it. Once you've seen a few, just the way they fly and the way they scream, you don't get swallows and martins screaming like that.
Cool, really interesting. Peter and Sally have got a good tip for us. We have 2 swift boxes from John Stimson on a west-facing front, which have white lids, and we've been advised that this reduces the temperature in the nesting box.
Yes, I didn't mention any by name, but Stimson, he sells them at just about cost price. I think he's a total enthusiast. And I think SOS used to recommend Stimson boxes. They've got side entry, but they are very reasonably priced and reasonably robust. So painting them white is particularly important if they're going to get hot and to reduce the temperature. So it's a good idea to paint them white. It will never do any harm, and it might actually do some good.
Brilliant. I've just completely lost track of where I was looking for that link. I've just popped a link to the Swift Conservation page, which I think sells quite a lot of the John Stimson boxes, which is fantastic. They're sold at nearly cost as well. That makes it as accessible as possible. So sorry, yeah, carry on, Mike.
The box with the entrance underneath, there's one company that makes them. It's called Peak Boxes.
Okay, yeah, they're on there as well, I think.
Yes.
Oh, nice. I've got, here we go. So Anne has said, in previous years seen in Gibbon Road in Newhaven, in Seaford, they nest in the tall houses along the A259 by the War Memorial, Sutton Park Road, above Nationwide Building Society, and further along by the British Legion. They've got quite large sort of gables there as well, which is quite interesting.
So that's in Newhaven?
Newhaven, in Seaford, that is.
That's in
That's
Seaford.
along the A259 by the War Memorial. They've got
Okay,
quite
well-
nice spaces between the soffits and the walls there. So
Well, that's wonderful news, because this is unknown to SOS. In their database, there aren't any active nests. So that's a case in point where it isn't that the birds aren't there, it's just that they're not being counted and reported. So that sounds like a wonderful thing for someone to actually do a count, see roughly how many birds there are, how many nests there are, and get them into either just into bird track directly or as part of a survey.
brilliant. That's fantastic that can be used. Thank you, Anne. Vicky said, thank you, fantastic talk, great work, and we'll be buying a Swift box. That's great news.
That's good.
Alex and Shelley have asked, what species of sparrows were you referring to? House sparrows?
Yes. If we could get tree sparrows, that would be very extraordinary. So house sparrows, but they're endangered as well. So giving them a home is good. But obviously, we've got to make room for the swifts as well.
Is Alex and Shelley, who joined us the previous weeks as well in Massachusetts in the US. I love that you come from the US. Thank you so much for tuning in and welcome. And they've got chimney swifts, which is fantastic.
Yes.
Anne Rose said, do you have to put new boxes near existing nest sites?
Well, what we recommend is that the closer you get to an existing nest, the sort of faster the young swifts might find it. So you can start a new colony where there are no reports of nests. There are, I think, I heard someone put some up in Henfield and there have been no reported swifts, and it took years. I actually heard the figure of 7 years, but now they're there and they're breeding. So you can put them anywhere, but the speed at which they'll get adopted depends on this proximity to existing colonies, but it's also helped by the caller. If you get a caller, and this peak boxes, they sell callers as well. If you play that, it's been shown that you can increase the speed with which the swifts find them, the young swifts find them, and habitation is more likely and faster.
Brilliant, really interesting. Alex and Shelley have said that house sparrows are everywhere in Massachusetts. They're considered a pest and they chase out our hummingbirds and other native birds. And you're welcome for the shout out. I think if you're tuning in from Massachusetts, I think that's well worth a shout out. I think you're the furthest anyone's come. And I thought Northumberland was impressive a little while ago. I think that is about it now. That we've got no more questions coming in on the Facebook Live. It's certainly slowed down on the Zoom chat. So I guess unless there's anything else, this is just a time to say thank you everyone for coming along as always. And thank you everyone who's, there's one more for Julia. Hang on, hold the phone. I live in a bungalow, so not high enough for a box. Is there a tall building locally we can put some on? Julia's asked.
Well, that would be a question to ask your local Swift Society. We have people who just donate money to us and say, can you put a box up somewhere good? And we use that money for that purpose. So, and they can see and follow us, and we can tell them where the box went, and they can look at the box and they can come on Swift walks and see them. So it's that's one way people in bungalows can help the Swifts.
Brilliant. Thank you, Mike. And yeah, thank you, Mike, for the talk as well. It was very informative, very interesting, and great to see what's happening on the doorstep. Thank you, everyone, for coming along, either for this talk or if you've done all of them. That's really quite impressive. So thank you for coming along, and thank you for supporting the urban, the Wilder Gardens scheme through the talks. There'll be more coming through that via the Facebook page and the newsletters in the future as well. So keep an eye out for that. A big thanks as well to Leslie, the chair of Greenhavens, who for some reason has let me take the reins during these a little bit, which is probably a bad idea, and she's probably regretting that heavily now. And for Karen as well for helping to facilitate it to such a massive degree. And of course, a huge thank you as well to the Department for Digital Culture, Media and Sport and the National Lottery Community Fund for helping to fund these as well. Thank you, everyone. I hope you all stay safe and we can get together soon for hopefully a face-to-face AGM or network meeting. We'll
That'd be
see you all
nice.
soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers,
Thank
everyone.
you. Bye.
Bye bye.